Hello and welcome to the Sophia Sessions podcast. Today's episode shares the story of Stephen Norris, Vistage Chair and CEO Mentor. November is obviously Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, and today's episode really does highlight the plea for men of all ages to speak up and ask for help. Stephen's story is truly inspirational. How he as a child was failed by the social care system, faced years of trauma, family breakdown and bullying, which ultimately led Stephen at just the age of 10 years old wanting to take his own life. This honest and moving episode walks us through how Stephen had the courage to change the direction of his life and break away from the deep and intertwined wires of trauma. Just a quick heads up, this episode is a very raw account of Stephen's life, which features conversation around suicide, sexual and physical abuse, bullying and some explicit language. Okay. Amazing. Well, hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Okay, thank you.
Good. Thank you for making such a long journey to come onto the Sophia Sessions podcast. It's really appreciated. So I think a good place to start is to do some introductions, and you to introduce yourself to the listeners, who you are and maybe a bit about what you do.
My name is Stephen Norris. I'm 63, born in 61. I'm a Vistage Chair. I look after groups of CEOs and help them run better businesses and lead better lives and make better decisions.
Amazing. And how did you come into partnership with Sophia?
I met the CEO about a year ago, and we got talking about the work that he did and the work that you do here. And I was so impressed with that that I was open enough to speak to Richard, the CEO, and say, interestingly, this is my journey. And whilst, I may speak well enough, my journey is a tough one, a really tough one. And when I spoke to Richard about it, he was quite taken aback by what I told him, and said, I think that's a story you could share with us here, and it may resonate with some people. And I thought, if it will, then I'd be happy to share.
Amazing. There is such, I think, power in story sharing and telling,
Yes.
lived experience, especially to other men, other young people. It really does make young people that I work with anyway relate, and they can resonate to the topics that are often, not spoken about
I agree.
enough.
Yes, I agree.
So I think there's really real power in it, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. The first time I met you and, we took a little glimpse into your story, I was really moved and really inspired by, just by how you built yourself up over the years, having gone through so much adversity and so much trauma, which I'm sure we'll touch on today. So I think it's important to acknowledge that it is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, November, which does link to your topic today. So I wonder if you could kind of delve in a little bit more into what your chosen topic for our conversation today is.
Yes, I'd be happy to. I wanted just to share a little bit about my life and what's happened to me, certainly as a young man, and how that shaped me for quite a while in my life, in the hope that people will realise that your beginning shouldn't define you, and that there is an opportunity to step out of the nonsense you're involved in, and the nastiness and the violence and all of the things that I've experienced, and do something else. It becomes a choice. You don't have to be a victim, and I didn't want to be a victim. I was determined not to be a victim. So yes, that was what I wanted to share today, to talk about some of my mental health struggles, and see if it did any good, see if it would help anybody listening to consider, if he could do it, I think I could too.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does get people thinking when people talk about this kind of thing. And as we kind of touched upon, I think you were saying that the hope is that people will listen and get something out of it, and hopefully self-reflect, and maybe have the hope that actually they do have the agency within themselves to make different choices and change the direction of their life, like
Yes.
you have.
Yes.
Yeah, which is
I
fantastic.
think we all have that agency for sure. I think we just have to realise that.
Yeah, definitely. So thinking about the direction of your life then, I'm wondering where a good place to start is for you. Is it back in the early days or? Yeah.
I'd say so, because if I look at my life up until the age of 6 or 7, I think it was quite a reasonable life. I don't remember very much about it, and through counselling I understand why. I don't understand very much about it, but my feeling was at that time that I lived in a nice house. I had brothers and sisters. We all lived together in a nice house. My mother was there. The man who I believed was my father was there. He turned out not to be my father. And at 7 years old, my world was turned upside down when this man that I loved turned out to be someone who'd interfered sexually with my sisters and had beaten the older boys, my older brothers, had beaten them on a regular basis. And I think I suffered some of that, although I don't remember that. But I have a total recall of the bottom of our house that we lived in. Total recall, the basement, the dining room, the lounge, the kitchen, the outdoor space, the front door, the downstairs toilet. And when I get to the foot of the stairs, I can't remember anything else. And I think through counselling, I realised that there's obviously some trauma there that was where the abuse happened. It happened out of sight of my mother, it happened upstairs, and I therefore have a mental block and I can't actually remember that. And I did speak to my counsellor about that and said, quite normal probably, I was only 7, it's probably quite normal that I can't remember certain things. And she said, yes, but you've got total recall of the downstairs, why have you got no recall whatsoever of the upstairs? Which was quite profound and made me really think. And so at that point, at 7, when this man was taken from my life, put in prison, it was all in the newspapers, what he'd done. Local newspapers, national newspapers, the Sunday newspapers. There was a paper at the time called the News of the World. It was a huge spread in there. And so obviously the whole family were known. My mother was known, I was known, that everybody was mentioned, children's names and everything. So, we had to move home. But when we moved, it took not very long for everyone to know who we were. The family was split up. We all ended up in various bits of care. Yeah, it was a pretty traumatic time. My sister, who'd been most abused, ran away to London. She was 14. She wasn't seen for a while and then turned up. And then at 18, she emigrated to Australia. It was such a traumatic experience for her and she never recovered. And she and I were the best of friends, and unfortunately I lost her this year. It was something we'd spoken about. It was traumatic for her. And I have also another sister who's died and a brother who's died, and I don't think they ever got over it either. Yeah, it was a pretty tough time. Of course, moving away to another house at that age, people knowing that I was the son of an abuser, people said, you'll end up being just like your father, and so people would taunt me as a weirdo and a kiddie fiddler and all sorts of horrible things that children say to you, and older children and mothers and fathers of children who said, don't play with him, we know what his father did. And so, I got a lot of abuse, and there was I got into lots and lots of trouble, lots of fights, because everybody would say that, my mother was a prostitute and, your father's this, and it was just horrible. And I was then on my own with a younger sister, and I had nobody older. My brother had gone into the army, another brother had gone somewhere else, and the whole family were split up. Those who couldn't live independently were in care. It was just a terrible time. After getting into one last bit of trouble too many, I was then expelled from school. And then I was taken eventually after some months to another school, was promptly expelled from there because of course everybody taunted me, and I got into so much trouble and so many fights with people and things that were said. And so eventually I was, at the age of 10, I was taken to a place called the Unit. Didn't know it was anything else other than the Unit. It was on the side of what was termed at that time a mental hospital. And it was full of patients who ended up in that hospital because they were, children of 12 and 13 with the age of a 3-year-old, or
Right.
and then me. And people like the leader of the Loughton skinheads was in there, and it hadn't dawned on me until sometime afterwards that he had long hair, and he had a personality disorder, and of course at 10 years old I had no idea about that, but it dawned on me many years later that this guy who used to beat me up was the leader of the Loughton skinheads, but he had long hair.
Wow.
So afterwards you think, wow, what on earth was I doing in there? I was in there for 3 months. It was a horrible place, lots of violence. I was obviously locked away in there with no real idea of why I was there and how long I was there and what I would do. And after 3 months I was told, well, we've finished our assessment of you and we're sending you to a school called Priory Meadow. It's in St Osyth. It's not there anymore. It was just outside Clacton, and when I went there I thought it was a school, naively, until I realised that as they opened the gates and locked them behind me, and then I saw all the barbed wire around, that it wasn't actually a school. It was a place where I was going to be detained. And so it was called a school, but it was an approved school, I think is what they called it at the time. But it was the midpoint between there and Borstal. But I was locked away with the very worst kids who'd committed some horror crimes, some real horror crimes, and little old me. The violence was on another level. I mean, there was violence every day from kids who just were feral.
Wow.
And it took me a long time to explain. It would be no exaggeration to say that I would get into a fight every single day, and sometimes multiple fights on every single day. It was just the worst place I've ever set foot in. The longer it went on, the worse it got, because if you would dare to beat somebody in a fight, then someone else who was a little older would come and beat you. It got so bad that on one occasion, in the middle of the night, I woke up with a pillow over my face with one of the boys trying to kill me, and I managed to get away, but you couldn't say anything for fear of repercussion. But this said individual then, some weeks later, when it all sort of died down, him and his brother were on top of me on the next occasion with a pillow over my face, and one of the brothers saying to me, "Say goodbye. Say goodbye, Stephen. Say goodbye." Yeah, I thought at that point I was dead. I fought them mercilessly and managed to get them off me and managed to sort of raise the alarm, and that was that. But from that period forward, I didn't feel comfortable sleeping, because that was 2 occasions when people had tried to kill me, and I just had enough. It was just horrible. I can't begin to explain what it was like. It was just the worst of time. I decided, okay, well, enough is enough. I really have had quite enough of this, and so I started stealing drugs from the drugs trolley when it used to come round, because some of the children needed to be medicated. And so I started stealing drugs from there as the sister, I think she was the nurse, to a point over a week or so that I'd had enough, I'd got enough. Planned that at the weekend when there was less staff on, that I would get myself over the wall. There was a sort of a weak point in the far left wall where you could get out. Anyway, I managed to get over the wall and get out. And got some drink and took the drugs and ran away and ran as far as I could until I got to sort of small wooded area, little copse that I sat down in. Made my peace with everyone, said goodbye to everyone, said goodbye to a couple of friends, and said goodbye to my brothers and sisters, and decided that I'd take the drugs and drink the drink, and this would be the right time to go and to leave, and to stop the pain and to stop everything that was going on, and that's what I did. And I was very calm. I was very calm about it. I remember that sense of feeling of being so calm about it. Of course, I ended up in hospital. I woke up in hospital. Social worker and various other people were there and asked me what I'd done and why I'd done it, and I said because I was being bullied and mercilessly bullied, and couldn't get away from it, and it was daily and twice daily and 3 times daily, and no, that doesn't go on in there. We know it doesn't go. And I said, well, it is, and that's the reason I've done it. I'm not lying. And I wasn't listened to. And, before I knew it, I was well enough to be returned. And I went straight back in to the same place I was with the same people that I was. But now I was a guy who'd tried to take his own life. And so, I was bullied for that, bullied for being a coward, bullied for being, that guy. And, people would taunt me and say, oh, Norris, take some drugs, here's some drugs, put them in your pocket for later, that sort of stuff. Nurse, Stephen wants some drugs, that sort of stuff. And that went on for a while. Daily, lots of things like that. But fortunately, after 18 months of being there, literally as I say it to you, on the one day somebody came to my room and said, Stephen, you're being released tomorrow. We're going to take you to the local bookshop to choose a book, then you're going to leave. Wow. So I went to the book, I chose Robinson Crusoe. I remember the book distinctly. It just sort of resonated with me, that sort of feeling of isolation, and I just saw it and thought, that's just me, I feel like that. So I took that book, went back, next morning I packed my stuff and left. Gosh. And I said, where am I going? And they said, well, you're going back to Mum. And I said, well, I don't want to go back to Mum, and Mum doesn't want me there either. And they said, well, she's your mum, you're going back to your mum. So I arrived. Mum was less than impressed to see me. I was less than impressed to be there. They then enrolled me in the local school on the tough council estate where we lived, in the very worst part of town. But now I was, the local hero. I was this weird, mad, all fighting kid that would fight anybody, all of those things. And so you arrive at the school and everybody says, oh, so you're this big hard nut guy that,
And everybody's already got that assumption.
Everyone's already got that assumption, and I arrive, and everybody who I know on this estate, who knows I'm coming back to school, says, oh, Norris will sort you out. Norris will sort you out. You think you're tough, and you wait to see Norris. And so, I arrived at 12 years old at this school, and having missed the whole of the first year of school, and was sort of it was the January after Christmas period of the second year, and I just got sort of parachuted rather into this class of kids, and was told to get your head down and don't make the same mistakes you've made. But of course, everybody at school wanted a piece of me. Everybody at school, the kids that were 15, the kids that were 16, used to come and prod and poke me and say, apparently you're tough, apparently you'll fight anybody. And I said, well, yeah, I will, but not here. And so we used to organise fights outside of school, and that I would fight anybody, and I wouldn't care who it was. I didn't have a sense of worth at all. And I, crazy as it might sound, I used to think, if this is how I should die, fighting someone who was 16 or 17, so be it. That's my destiny. That's how it should have been. I tried to end my life anyway. I don't care whether I'm here or not. Nobody cares whether I'm here or not, frankly. So if this is my calling to, go out on my feet fighting somebody much older, or, being stabbed, or, well, so be it. It's part of my calling. And ridiculous as that might sound, and it took me a long, long time to discuss that with anybody. And through counselling, I managed to admit that that's how I'd felt during that time, and that was why, people would pre-arrange fights with me outside of school, because I knew that I couldn't fight in school, because if I got expelled, I'd go straight back to where I came from, and I couldn't bear that. I think that would have been something I couldn't have put up with for the next 3 or 4 years until I was 16, which was the option. I mean, I knew that. I knew that's what would happen to me. My social worker had said, you really need to keep your nose clean, because if you don't, you'll end up going straight back. You're sort of kind of out on licence, really. Right. So that was that. And I spent, the next 3.5 years trying to keep my nose clean, trying to get my head down at school, be part of anything, football teams and basketball teams and rugby teams and all of those things, everything that I liked. Academically, I was smart enough to keep myself in the the better sets, the set ones and the set twos of everything, in English and maths, and even though I'd missed such a lot of schooling, I was still bright enough to do that, thankfully. And that sort of just about saved me. I had one or two teachers that I liked, one or two teachers that liked me, and nobody knew what happened outside of school. I obviously had to keep that very private. I couldn't let anybody know that sort of nonsense was going on. Sometimes it would spill over in school, and was so worried about getting expelled, and so worried that went to the headmaster one time and kind of said to him, I'm being bullied by some of the biggest guys in the school. And he actually said to me, which I thought was very sweet, he said, if it should be one of those that I catch you fighting with, I'll allow it. He said, because they need to be taught a lesson. And he said, good luck with it. And I just remember thinking, wow, that's a really modern approach to that. But I used to, regularly turn up at school, and he would take me to one side and sort of see, and he said, are you okay?
Care for you, yeah.
Yeah, because I had lumps and bumps out of me all the time, and black eyes. I had constantly black eyes, and swollen bits of me, where I'd been punched by people twice my size. So that was, a pretty condensing, 10 years there. It was something that I used to say, it wasn't that bad. And when I spoke to my counsellor, she said, Stephen, you really need to stop doing that.
Yeah, almost minimising the trauma that you went through.
Yeah, she said, own it. She said to me, it's because obviously there's a much grander version of the one that I'm sharing here. But when I told her some of the things that had gone on, she said it's probably one of the most violent childhoods I've ever heard about. It really is pretty nasty. And she said, you just have to own it, and you just have to admit that's what's happened to you, and you can't change anything about it, and it's unfortunately shapes you in a lot of ways. And you must own it.
I'm really moved actually by I think just the pain that younger Stephen went through. I mean, when you started talking initially about the early days and the amount of change and loss that you went through at such a young age in such a developmental part of your life, and then going from post to post. And it sounds, correct me if I'm wrong here, but it sounds like you just didn't have the information about what was happening to you, and the choice, that thing that's so important to us as individuals, was removed, and things were just put onto you, and your agency sounds like it was just completely removed.
Yes, it was. I really had no idea where I was going. I mean, I was, Mum sometimes couldn't cope with me at home, and so I would then be for a period in care, and I was in a children's home, and then I was in foster care, and I really had no, my school life was so interrupted, even in my teenage years, because I would be there and I wouldn't be, and then I would be, then I wouldn't be, and people had no idea, had he been expelled again, had something happened, had he been returned, and it was like, oh no, Mum couldn't cope, and I'd been away for a while and been attending another school, and all of that sort of nonsense. And every time I attended a new school, I was the new kid that everybody sort of said, oh, I've heard about this guy, and so everybody just again wanted a piece of me. And you just couldn't avoid it. It's just that it was just a time when I just became everyone's punch bag, really. And also just became a parcel that everybody passed around, without telling me why
you were going.
No, there was very often, social worker would turn up at home and just say, could you pack your things, Stephen?
Oh wow, not even any.
No, and you go, I'd say, yeah. He said, you have a suitcase, don't you? I said, yeah, and I had one under my bed. It was there permanently, and I just used to go and take my suitcase out and pack everything I needed, and put suitcase, and said, am I leaving? And they said, yeah, just for a little while, Stephen. And then I'd go, and then I thought, well, my sister would wave me goodbye, and I'd wave her goodbye, and then then I was back in a month, or I was back in a week, or I was back in 3 months, or.
But no clarity as to when that would be, and I think for such a young child that must have just been so terrifying.
Yeah, it was horrible.
So uncertain.
Yeah.
Gosh.
Yeah.
You mentioned the unit that you were in and then having to then be placed in a mainstream school. When you were at the unit, were you engaging in any learning or education or anything like that?
Yes.
And what was that like trying to... I find it fascinating that when you're in a place that's so emotionally traumatizing and then you're expected or, you know, encouraged to learn. And I think, how can you learn when your brain is in such a constant place of fight or flight?
Yeah.
And I'm intrigued as to what that was like to try and do that.
It was incredibly difficult. You know, we had a couple of great teachers, but they literally were teaching us like you were taught in infant school or junior school. It was pretty much, you know, one master would teach you several different subjects. But because there were people in there from other parts of Essex that bordered London, you know, there were some really tough characters who had little or no education whatsoever. And so whilst I was quite bright, they were educating the whole class.
Okay.
And there were lots of people in there who couldn't read. I mean, we were 10, 11 years old and some of them just couldn't read. I mean, they'd never learnt to read. And I was reading at 4. I remember, you know, conversations I had later life with mum. You know, I was very early to read and craved reading. And so it was difficult because, you know, some of the guys were on sort of Jack and Jill books and I was, you know, reading proper novels. And it was really difficult. And of course, you know, people would beast you for being smart. And so that wasn't great. And also because you were smart, they would make you help them with their homework because they couldn't do their homework. Because they couldn't read very well or they couldn't do maths, and because I was good at both subjects, you know, I would very often be saying, "Oh, Norris, you'll do my homework for me, won't you?" And you think, well, I don't really have a choice.
Yeah, and it's that elimination of choice again, isn't it? Knowing that if you didn't do that, what would happen or what was the threat for you?
Yeah, that kind of stuff. So, you know, it just became, and it was also a way of me fitting in and surviving, that if I did that for people, then, you know, I was possibly less likely to get a beating today. You know, tomorrow maybe, but not today.
Yeah, going just day by day.
Yeah, very much. Yeah, I mean, you couldn't make friends with anybody because, you know, there was. I mean, I know some of the names that were there. You know, and some of those people, I've subsequently found out have died, or indeed a couple I know who are in prison. It wasn't normal for people to leave. When I left, and again, I found this out some years later talking to people that, it wasn't common for people to leave. Once they went there, they usually stayed.
Wow.
Or they went to Borstal, or eventually they went to prison, or they died, or they got onto drugs, or whatever it might have been. So it was unusual for someone to leave. So, yeah.
And I'm just reflecting on what you were talking about with the survival. A couple of times through your story so far, you've shared actions and behaviours and ways of kind of dealing with the trauma that you've taken that sound like, in a way, sophisticated coping mechanisms of what can I do to survive, what can I do to get through, what can I do to protect myself, and something we say a lot at Sophia is behaviour is communication. So if there is a young person lashing out, punching walls, throwing things, you know, whatever it might be, there's an unmet need beneath all that, and actually rather than punishing that child, let's understand why they're behaving that way. And it seems that, you know, forgive me if I'm speaking out of turn here, but it seems that the system really let you down in that respect, in not, you know, giving you a chance to understand what's going on that made you behave in those aggressive ways. And it sounds like you're just trying to survive and protect yourself. Yeah,
exactly that. And you know, the truth is, I know at 10 years old, before I was, you know, taken away, that I'd already gone to the local grammar school to have a look round. You know, they'd taken me to the grammar school. They told me what I would be in Corpus Christi House. I knew that, so I knew I knew what blazer I would need. I knew what emblem I would need for the house that I was in, and it was a very prestigious, very nice grammar school, and all of my friends, the people that I was, all went to the grammar school. I saw them many years later, and all of them asked, "God, what happened to you?" You know. But yeah, all of the ones that were expected to go to the grammar school went, and the only one that didn't was me.
Part of the work we do is working with young people in care, and the amount of social workers that those children have and the amount of different homes, different placements, different schools, just the enormity of change and lack of knowledge of their circumstances. One minute you're doing this, the next you're being told to pack your suitcase but you're not sure where you're going. And the work that we're trying to do is to give young people that have had, trauma in whatever way it might have kind of presented, consistency and knowledge of what's going to happen for them, because there's just so many gaps.
Yes.
Which creates such, chaotic attachment, doesn't it?
It does.
It's I don't know whether I'm coming or going. Are you going to care for me or are you going to leave me? And that, the impact of that must just, we see it. You've experienced that is just awful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and to know that, you go through that long in your life when nobody cares about you, nobody loves you, nobody cares about you, hence, me saying enough is enough when I was 10. But that stayed with me for a long time, the fear, the feeling of worthlessness. I have, such low self-esteem and such worthlessness and couldn't understand when I was a young adult that people actually liked me. I found that quite odd, that people really liked me as a person. And I remember my older brother John saying something very similar. He said it took me a long time for me to realise that people liked me. And I always thought that was such an odd thing when he said it to me. I always remember that, and I did tell him that many years later. And I'm glad I did, because he passed away a few years ago, and I was able to at least have had that conversation with him to say, I didn't understand you at the time, but you know what, as I became a young adult, I really got that. I really understood that, people just liked me. That it was like, wow, that's a revelation. Because nobody's liked me this far. Nobody's loved me, and certainly nobody's really liked me. So it was quite a revelation that people actually was like, yeah, no, I really like you. You're a great friend. And you think, wow, that's something I haven't heard before.
Yeah, and that must have been, like you say, quite confusing maybe to hear that, because it's not something that you'd been brought up hearing. As
an older man, I still find that quite confusing. I will do anything for anybody, and I love helping people. I really do. But I find it very difficult to ask for help, even now. And I think that's just a defence mechanism of, being there at a time when I had to look out for me and me only, and I was the only person who could look out for me.
And those things get wired very deep.
Yeah, they do. They absolutely do. If you want anything, you have to do it yourself, and you can't rely on anybody to help you. And people promise to help and they don't, and social workers promise to help and then they leave, and then somebody else has to come in and they have to review my case again and understand me again, and then I think that we're getting somewhere, and then they go. And that's just, as you say, a real failing of the whole system.
You were reflecting on your internal dialogue and feelings of worthlessness. I'm interested in how you started to become aware of that and how you moved through it to a point of where you are now, because those kind of the things that we're told as children, if we were told them repeatedly, they become core beliefs, don't they? Like you said, even now you might struggle to kind of accept those compliments, or when people are kind of saying to you, you're kind, or whatever it might be. How did you begin to unwire those processes within you?
I realised quite early on that I needed to change my environment. Everything, where I lived, the people I associated with, my mother, even my brothers and sisters, who were all sort of hardwired for self-destruct, they all had this common theme of, woe is me, woe is me, woe is me, this happened, and, I had conversations with some of them over the years, and, we talked about the hardship we'd been through, and I said, okay, I think I had it pretty tough, but I had it tougher. And then another one would say, well, I think I had it tougher still. And I said, well, okay, well, for me, it's not a competition. I don't think we are going to give any awards out for which one of the brothers and sisters had it worse than the other. I don't think it is. I think we just have to acknowledge that we all have our crosses to bear, and we've all had a really, really tough time. However, some of them still wanted to be, the one on the top of the podium saying, well, I had it the worst. And I don't really understand that. We all had a tough time, and I get that. And I realised that that was a very toxic environment. I really needed to get away from that. So, my mother had a saying which dawned on me many, many moons later, that she said, well, Stephen was, he was a sort of a happy boy. I mean, if he wasn't at the end of the road playing football, he was out on his bike. And what she didn't say is he never wanted to be in the house. That was what she didn't say. That was the difference. And it's interesting how people take a view of that. And so her saying, he was, he was a child. I mean, you know what they're like. He was either out playing football or he was out on his bike. Read into that is, what time can I leave in the morning? What time are you happy for me to leave? What time do you need me home? I'll see you at both of those points. Yeah. So that was it. So 9 o'clock, I would be in at 9:15, and if I was able to leave the house at 8 o'clock in the morning, I would be gone. And I would spend the whole day out of the house, 24/7 if I could have done. And I realised that I didn't want to be in this environment. I didn't want to be around some of the people that I was getting into trouble with, and I just needed to change that. So eventually I just said, you know what, I need to just move away. And making that choice to go and live in a flat, I found myself a job. I worked so hard because I was so fearful that I would, as an apprentice, they would say after a year, I don't think we need you anymore. That I worked twice as hard as anybody else. Yeah. I would always do overtime. If they wanted somebody to work on a Sunday, I would work on a Sunday. I would just do whatever it was required of me, because I really wanted to stand out and I really wanted to be noticed. And that allowed me to put some money behind me, learn my trade, put some money behind me, move into a flat, distance myself from some of the people that I'd done. I discovered music at that point. I got myself into a punk band with some friends, a punk band that we're still in all these years later.
Brilliant.
And we get to play all around the world, and we've done some fun stuff, and that's been a little bit of a saviour for me, in truth, because it's something I have two friends that I've been friends with since I was 17 years old, so 46 years now I've been friends with them. They're my best friends in the world. They understand me completely, they accept me for who I am, they know all of my trauma, they know all of my troubles, and equally I know all of theirs. And we're very authentic with each other, and it's really very special relationship for me with Bart and Stuart. It's that took me off in a different direction and allowed me to realise that unless I changed my environment, as everybody who knows me within my circles in the work that I do now, one of my favourite sayings is, if you do what you did, you get what you got. Yeah. And I realised that very early, that if I stayed where I was and expected something to change, then then I really was crazy. I really need to step out of my environment, change something, and then expect a different result. And that's really the clarity of thought I had over it, that no good would become of me looking at everybody else in my family who was still wringing their hands and saying, woe is me, woe is me. I'm a product of what happened to me, and I'm a product of what happened to me. And yeah, I didn't want to be that guy.
So you took your pain and put it into something that allowed you to then break through that cycle and effectively, change your direction. Yeah. It's interesting though, isn't it? Because like you say, we're talking about kind of how the emotional self is in those moments, and actually it sounds like there was such a push away factor that maybe you weren't looking at the thing that was pulling you. It was just, I need to get out of this environment. Yes. And I need to do it now. Yes.
Push away factor, that's a very good way to describe it. Yes, it was. I needed to push away from that, because I truly felt, and that's interesting how you describe it like that, because I think any time subsequently to that, when I was a young man in my 20s, for example, anytime I stepped back into the family to try and help them, it wasn't so much that I was trying to help them out of the pit, it was actually that they were then trying to drag me back in. And I really had that sense of feeling that every time I go to help them, they don't actually want my help. What they want to do is they want to wallow in the misery and drag me back into the misery. And family members, mum, brothers, sisters, sort of making comments of, who the hell do you think you are? Look at you in your nice car. Who the hell do you think you are? Look at you with your house. Who do you think you are? That kind of thing. So nobody was pleased for me. Everybody was bitter about the fact that I'd stepped out and done something.
Doing well,
And I've to this day, I've never understood that. I just don't know where that comes from. I don't understand it.
Because it looks like your life was so different to the start of your life, and you've obviously done incredibly well for yourself. Yeah, just so the strength and courage that must have taken. I can't even imagine how hard it is to. It's difficult to make any change in life, isn't it? But to make one so huge and give yourself that new direction is just amazing and so inspiring to those that are maybe stuck in vicious circles and thinking that they can never get out.
Yeah. And that's the truth, and I think I've reflected on that a lot. I really have, and I look at what happened to people that I knew at that time, 10, 11, 12, and knowing that some of them are not with us anymore, and knowing what was expected of them happened. They took drugs and died. They ended up in prison. Those were the things that were expected of people. That was what was discussed when I was locked up. Talking to people now, many years later, I think people fully expected that was what was going to happen to me. People that I knew up until the age of 15, from the age of 12 to 15, people that hadn't then seen me until I was a 40-year-old man, were amazed to see me, first and foremost. Secondly, said, please tell me what happened, because I've lived the last 25 years expecting you to be dead.
Wow.
I can't believe you're still alive. I thought you were on a collision course with death, with drugs, with everything. Please tell me. And one particular friend of mine who was also picked on at school, and he and I looked after each other at school. Yeah, that was his view. He was quite struck by the fact that I was still alive and that I was doing okay, and had just said, for the last 25 years, I just fully expected you to be dead. Amazing, yeah.
It really is.
Yeah.
It really is.
Struck me. That really resonated with me. That's what he thought my life was heading for. That's what he expected. And I think had I had that conversation with him as a 17, 18-year-old man, it would have been quite inspiring for me to say, wow, no, this is what I've done. I've made these changes in my life. And things are materially different as a consequence of that.
And like you were saying at the unit, the outcome of people being there usually was down those routes.
It was.
So the fact that you were one in goodness knows how many that were able to get out and make a whole new life for yourself over the coming years is really, really profound. I think it must have been a really interesting experience, a very moving experience for you to have those conversations with people who were just so shocked.
I'm not ashamed to say I cried when he told me. He cried as well. He was so pleased that I was alive, and I'd never thought about it. To live for 25 years with the thought that your best friend at school was probably dead. Yeah, back in the days before Facebook and all those things, which made life easier to find people. But he cried and I cried, and we've remained sort of firm friends ever since. And I wish would have known more about what I was doing. I just had this real sense that I just didn't want my start to define me. I wanted to defy people. I mean, I was quite a defiant person anyway. I really was. I didn't cry for. Oh my goodness, I don't even know if I said I didn't cry for 40 odd years, that would probably be true. It became a standing joke that whatever happened to me, people could do anything to me and I wouldn't cry because I didn't want to show weakness. And sometimes I was beaten black and blue and I wouldn't cry because I didn't want to show that weakness. And so it took a lot for me to really let go. And this occasion was one of those only occasions that I cried, because it really got me that he was so pleased that I was alive. And it really mattered to him. It really struck me. It took me a few days to get over the fact that I'd actually cried.
I can imagine,
that I'd actually allowed that, incredible, really.
It's those walls kind of coming down slowly. Yeah. And like you say, that phrase of that mattered to him is just what your younger self really needed, didn't it? So from what you've shared with me today. Yeah. And I think, just to have that vulnerability, and like you were talking about your two best friends, to have such authentic friendships where you you understand, you can kind of emotionally understand each other and be able to have those conversations is so important.
Yes.
And particularly, like, for someone who's not cried for that amount of time as a coping skill and as a protective factor, to go through that process where those things, you allow yourself to delve into those things, I think is amazing and such a hard thing to unwire.
Yes, it is. And I wish, truthfully, that I'd had counselling much earlier. When it wasn't a thing, really, when I was younger. And I really wish it had been. I know I would have led a much more authentic life, been able to have spoken about these kind of things many, many years ago. I'd have liked to have unwired myself, from the hard wire that I'd got. Violence became such a normal thing for me. It was never, I laughingly say, and people have said to me, you don't have a flight mechanism, you just have a fight mechanism. And I do. I'm very calm around violence. It's incredible to say that, and not for any bravado whatsoever. It's just a very normal thing for me.
Of course, yeah.
And it's quite terrifying that in a situation where there's potential harm, that I have no ability to get into flight mode. I just have a stand and fight mode, because that's all I've ever known, and it's all I've ever been able to do. It's the only way I've been able to survive, really.
Yeah.
And that's quite terrifying. But I would have liked to have spoken to someone many, many years ago about that as a 20-something man. I certainly feel I would have been a more empathetic father, a better husband. I think I could have been a less hardwired guy, a much more unwired guy. You do bring some of the things with you from childhood into your adult life, and when you have children yourself, my expectations for them were too high, and my want for them was too much, and my criticism of them was too much at times, and I regret that massively. And I think show me a man who hasn't lived with regrets and I'll show you a liar, is how I feel about it. I would love to take my older self back to my 20-something and teach him all that I know now, and say, look, you've done well to step out of the environment. Now here are all the things that could potentially go wrong. It took me a little while to get to grips with that, because I think I have listened to some very learned people who say, oh, you should never live with regret. And I'd like to think that would be true, but it's not. I don't think, there are scholars that say that's how you should live, but I don't subscribe to it.
No.
Because too many things have gone wrong in my life, and too many things are a product of my younger years. The wiring, the hard wiring of me needed unwiring a lot earlier, for me to have brought this version of me to a version of me in my 20s.
Yeah.
That would have been better. So that's my biggest regret, is I didn't do that.
But like you say, it might not have been accessible to you at that point.
No, it wasn't.
Imagine if we did have that thing, that hindsight, and be able to do that and go back and make those different decisions. But ultimately different ones have been made, and like you say, the only thing you can do is carry on learning. That's all we can all do, isn't it? Is continue learning each day. It's okay to not to subscribe to the kind of scholars who are saying this, because they haven't been in your shoes.
Yeah, that's
and every
true.
journey is very individual, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And it took me a little while to get my head around that, I think.
Yeah.
But because I wanted to live a life with no regrets, of course I did. I really did. That was something that was important to me, because, growing up as a child with all of the things that had gone on, I thought, right, I can make a difference. I want to live a life without regret. And I'm not able to say that I did that.
So thinking back, we have sort of touched on your younger self. I have a final question to ask you. And that question is, if you could go back to your younger self, that younger Stephen, and imagine he's here in the room today, what would you say to him?
I'd say to him, please get some help. And this is where I get emotional, I think, because all that had happened to me was a lot. It was a lot to cope with. And I spent too long just saying, oh, I'm okay. It was all right. It wasn't that bad. It's just childhood. That's what happens. But I could never tell anybody the hideous trauma. And even people who think they know me quite well will perhaps listen to this podcast and realise, wow, I didn't know this guy at all, really, because I've probably never spoken as openly as I do about it now. But I think, I really, really needed to unburden myself of everything that had gone on. I really, really would have said, get some help. Get some help, talk through your problems, cut people off in your life that add no value to your life. I regret having a relationship with the man who I thought was my father when he came out of prison. I saw him when he came out of prison, and I regret doing that. And I regret perhaps giving my mum as much support as I did. I forgave her for everything that she did to me, and then only after she passed did I find that she still mocked me after she died. And she used to call me the Duke of Norfolk because I lived in a nice house and I drove a nice car, and where my children were well educated, and she felt that I thought I was the Duke of Norfolk. And so that's tough. So had I have had some intervention earlier on, so yes, as you say, if young Stephen was here, I would first and foremost say, well done. You've made the step out of the environment you were in. Now follow that path religiously, go and get some help. Cut people out of your life that had no value, that are only trying to drag you back down into the pit. Stop the mental torture of allowing people to say, I did this for you when you were young, and I did this for you when you were young, and I did this, and you think, no you didn't. That's not the truth. So I would say to Stephen, just live an authentic life, get some help, live your life the best version that you can, and understand that cutting people out of your life that add no value to your life is the most important thing. And that's what I would say.
A bit lost for words. I just want to say, this has been a really moving, really emotive. I feel very moved. Just a really, really sincere thank you for sharing your story in this space. I think for those listening, it's going to shift something within anyone listening, and I hope that there are young men, older men listening who are struggling, that this might just be the thing that makes them get support and get help. And especially this month, for Men's Mental Health Month, it is really so important that we talk about it more, and people like you, using your lived experience and your trauma for so much good and speaking out, and in the hope that other men can too, I just think is so authentic, like you say, so needed and so appreciated. So yeah, a real deep thank you for sharing that.
It's a real pleasure, and I really hope anybody listening can take something from that and think, okay, he sounds like a really normal sort of guy. I could do that too. And you could. It shouldn't just be, I shouldn't be the 1%. I think there's an ability now with everything that you do here to make that a 20, a 30, a 40, a 50% of people that can survive some of the early trauma. So yes, if you are listening and you need some help, ask for it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Stephen, for coming on to the Sophia Sessions podcast today and so bravely sharing your story. Hearing about how you transformed your trauma and pain into success is truly inspirational, and it really does raise the message that it's never too late to ask for help and to change the direction of your life. If you were affected by anything that you hear in today's episode, I have posted some links in the description below where you can access mental health and wellbeing support. Please don't forget to like, share and subscribe. It really does help raise awareness of these important topics that we're covering. If you'd like to get in touch with us at Sophia, you can email us at wellbeing@sophia.uk.com.